Hi, general psychology students. So this week we are going to talk about chapter 9, developmental psychology, one of my all-time favorite chapters. Of course, next week we're going to cover social psychology, which is my absolute favorite chapter. That's my area of psychology. And so I love it most of all, but this developmental chapter is fantastic. Let me call up the PowerPoint slides so we can look at this together. So, and I know you know where to find these now. Okay, so one of the reasons why I think developmental psychology is so important is because so many of us choose to be parents. We're going to have kids. And even those of you that don't choose to be parents, you oftentimes end up being an aunt or an uncle to someone, or your neighbor has children. And so understanding how we change as we grow, both as we grow and then as we decline, as we age, is incredibly important. So in developmental psychology, we look at the pattern of continuity, in other words, the things that stay the same, and change, the things that change, that occur through the course of life. We sometimes call this from the womb to the tomb. Another thing, sometimes people will call it cradle to coffin. So we're going to look at all of the changes and all the things that stay the same over our entire lifespan. And so you might be interested to know how much actually stays the same. How much do we change over time? So there were some famous researchers that interviewed 3-year-olds and very big, long, intensive interviews looking at what they thought socially and morally, and looked at their cognitive development and all kinds of things, and then followed them through the lifespan and kept interviewing them over and over. And it was amazing, remarkable how many things stayed the same. The 3-year-old and the 33-year-old was real similar in happiness level. A lot of their personality characteristics were real similar. Morally, they tended to be very similar. But of course, physically and intellectually, they differed greatly. Think about a 3-year-old and a 33-year-old. So how in developmental psychology, we're going to focus on how things change and stay the same over time. Now, one of the things that we do is we're going to artificially separate development into 3 different areas. Physical development, so like how does your body change? How does it grow taller and become more and more able and then become less able and sometimes a little shorter over the lifespan? Then we're going to focus on cognitive processes, how we think, how we make sense of the world around us, how we memorize things, how we intellectually organize things, and how we remember things. So all of our cognitive processes, how that gets better and better and then maybe declines over the lifespan. And then our psychosocial processes. So how do we make friends, find meaning in our life? How do those psychosocial processes develop as we age? Okay, and how do they change? So in this video, I'm going to focus on the stage theorists. We're going to go through a couple stage theories of psychosocial processes and a stage theory of cognitive processes. And these are all very important stage theorists. One of the first stage theorists that we have, I already talked about this slide. One of the first stage theorists that we had was Freud. And so Freud talked about our psychosexual theory of development. We talked about this when we covered the personality chapter. So remember, he said that we begin with the oral stage and everything is discovered through the mouth, and then the anal stage, and then we have the Oedipal complex and the genital stage and the latent stage, and then on and on. And so even though we don't believe in Freud's theory of psychosexual development anymore, one thing of his that did stick is this idea that if you don't do well in one stage, you'll get stuck in it. So if you are successful in one stage, you'll move to the next stage and then move to the next stage. But if you don't resolve whatever's to be resolved in that stage, you'll get stuck in it. And so there'll be remnants of being stuck in your behavior right now. That idea stays in future stage theorists. So One of the big stage theorists that we're going to talk about is Erikson's psychosocial theory of development. And what Erikson believes is we go through these different stages. You can see one is from 0 to 1, and another one from 1 to 3 years old, and then 3 to 6 year old, and then 7 to 11 years old, and then 12 to 18 years old, and 19 to 29 years old, then 30 to 64 years old, then 65 until we die. So we go through these psychosocial developmental stages. And he believes that in each stage, there's like one critical thing that we're working on, one psychosocial task that we need to learn. And if we learn it, then when we get to the next stage of development, we're going to be we'll be acting one way. If we don't learn it, then we'll be in another way. And so we sort of will get stuck based on where we are, how we resolve each of these different issues. So let's go through these. We're going to spend quite a bit of time going through them. So the first stage, according to Erikson, is from birth to about 1.5 years old. And what the baby is working on here is trust versus mistrust. So when the baby cries, does someone come and comfort the baby? If the baby is hungry, does the baby get fed? If the baby wets himself, are his diapers changed? If the baby's bored, does someone come and cuddle and coo and talk to the baby and show them mobiles and colorful objects and stimulate their brain, all those neural connections that are just being wired and made and trimmed and hemmed. So much of that cognitive development is done during this first 1.5 years of the brain just wiring itself like crazy. So during this time psychosocially, does the infant learn that the world is a trusting place, that the world will meet my needs, that I can trust that my needs will be met? And if your diapers aren't changed when you're wet, when you're hungry, you're not always fed, and when you cry, sometimes people don't come to you, and when you're bored, you're just left alone in a crib to entertain yourself, you will end up not trusting the world. You'll have mistrust. You will believe that you are responsible for meeting your needs and that you can't rely on other people to meet your needs. Now, having said all this, I don't want anyone to mishear what I'm saying. If one night the mother was sick and couldn't meet the child's needs, and so one night the child cried herself to sleep, it's not like, now that's it, she's stuck in the mistrust area for the rest of the time. No, that's not how it works. But if most of the time the child's needs are met, then he or she will resolve this on the trust side. But if they're not regularly met, then mistrust might be how they end up resolving this stage. This is why it's really important, if you suffer from depression or if you have a substance abuse issue and you become a parent, that you make sure that you have a support system that you can call on and parent when you can't. So if you know that, you're diving down into a deep depression and you're having a hard time, you're struggling to get out of bed, you need to be able to call someone to change your baby's diapers, to coo and hold your baby, to feed your baby if the baby's hungry, to stimulate the baby. You can't just let the baby go for a whole week or two without getting their needs met because you're in a depressive episode. But if you're in a depressive episode, you probably aren't going to be able to meet your baby's needs. So hopefully, if you suffer from depression when this happens, you will have someone set up that you can call, whether it's a sister or a neighbor or your mom or a good friend or your partner would be ideal. So there needs to be someone that can step in if you can't. Similarly, if you have a substance abuse issue and you are drinking and you go on a binge, you need to make sure someone's there with your baby to take care of your baby's needs, because you don't want to have periods of time like 2 weeks where the baby's needs are not being cared for. So that's the trust versus mistrust. Okay. Now, from 1.5 years to about 3 years, the next stage, according to Erikson's stages of psychosocial development, is autonomy versus shame and doubt. So during this stage, the child is going to try to explore the world. So the child is going to try to tie his own shoes and go outside in the sandbox and going to try to move the sand and maybe put sand into a pail and see what happens when you turn the pail over. What does the sand do? And so he's manipulating the world, moving it around and seeing what kind of an impact he or she can make on the world. And also during this time, the child learns that the child's separate from other people, that they're not the same, they're not all connected. And so if the child learns to explore and have these successful experiences, the child will learn autonomy. I'm a unique, separate individual. But if when the child is trying to explore, he keeps hurting himself or he's told how he's doing it wrong and he's bad, then he could end up having shame and doubt and really not think that he is competent enough to explore the world. Okay, then the next stage from 3 to 6 years old, this is initiative versus guilt. This is where this desire to act independently is going to even blossom greater. It's really important that during this stage that the child is able to learn that he or she has choices to make, but that choices come with consequences, and that the child needs to learn to live with the consequences of the choices that he or she makes. So it's through all of these choices and then living with the consequences of the choices that the child learns to develop whether to trust himself at making good decisions. If the child keeps making decisions and doesn't have to live in the consequences of them, he can learn, ooh, I need my mom around to make decisions for me. Otherwise, things don't work the way they're supposed to. He or she needs to get really good at making choices. So it could be something as simple as, do you want milk or orange juice? The child says milk. Then the child takes the milk and it's like, no, I really want orange juice. Nope. Next time, maybe at lunch today, when it's time to make another choice, you can choose orange juice instead. But you chose milk, so for now, you have to live with milk. Milk is what you have for the next few hours. And what the child learns then is how to navigate decision making. And they become good decision makers during this time from 3 to 6 years old, if they're given this opportunity to make choices and live with the consequences of those choices. If the child goes, oh no, now I want orange juice instead, and the mom goes, oh, okay, here's orange juice then. And can you see how the child's not going to learn that they're a good decision maker? Because what they learn is that I have to depend on my mom because it's not always the way I want it. And so she just needs to take care of me. And they don't learn, oh, wow, I can actually sit drinking something that isn't my favorite, but look at, I've learned how to make a decision now. So that is initiative versus guilt. And you can see how if the child is not able to act independently well, then the child is going to have lots of guilt about how they're not competent. Then from 6 to 12 years old, this is usually when they're in school, they're going to learn industry versus inferiority, according to Erickson's psychosocial development. So here they're going to socially interact with other people. Oftentimes in a school environment, although with COVID that has changed things, but they're going to socially interact with other people. And they, in doing so, are going to learn that they're really good at certain things. They might learn that they're really good at coloring with crayons, but not quite as good at painting. They might learn that they're really good on the playground bouncing a ball, but not as fast as some of the other kids on the playground. They might learn that, boy, math comes easy to them and they're really good at math, but reading, they're a little bit slower in picking up reading. So they're learning all of these things that they're really good at and all of these things that they're not so good at. And they get to sort of live in both of these things, how it's great to be good at things and it's fine if you're not good at things too. And they're learning all of this. And if they do, they're going to have a sense of industry, a sense that they are good and competent beings. Now, if they're not good at anything, so they're not good at painting or drawing or bouncing the ball, and not they're the slowest runner and they're not good at reading and they're not good at math and they're not finding anything that they're good at. Well, that could lead to a sense of inferiority. So hopefully if that's going on, a teacher or a parent is someone is going to come in and intervene and put the child on an EAP or figure out what's making them develop at such a different rate as his or her classmates, and try to intervene and find out things that the child is good at so that they can get that sense of industry. Then during adolescence, according to Erikson's psychosocial development theory, it's identity versus role confusion. So during this time, the child is trying to get a sense of who they are. They're going to look at the groups in high school that they belong to. Are they the band kid? Or are they the cheerleader? Are they on the football team? They kind of try to find their tribe. Who are the people that they get along with? And they try on different roles. So they might think during this time, like one day, it's like, I wonder what would happen if I was just silly and goofy all day. So all day, or maybe just all the morning, they're going to act silly and goofy. To see, they're going to try that role of being silly and goofy. What does that feel like? Does it fit well for them? Another afternoon or another day, what would it be like to be serious? And so they might try on being serious. I wonder what happens if I don't study. And so they might not study for an exam and they fail it. And they're like, that's what happens when I don't study. What would happen if I ran as fast as I possibly could? Um, uh, Maybe this is during a practice in high school for track or something, or maybe it's just in the neighborhood. And then they try to run as fast as they can. They might throw up and they go, oh, that's what happens. Or they might end up going much faster than they thought they could. And they're like, wow, running is something that that's part of who I am. I'm a runner. So it's during this, during adolescence, they try on all different roles, try on all different things and explore who it is that they are. And they'll find certain roles fit them very well and others not so well. And hopefully out of this, they forge an identity so that there's parts of them that act the same, whether they're at home or at school or at church or with their friends. And other parts of them they modify based on the group that they're with. So they get a sense of who it is that they are. Now, if they're not able to do this, then they can be left with role confusion, where they're almost like a chameleon. They act completely different at home than they do at school, and completely different when they're with their cousins or another group of friends. And they're not going to successfully get this sense of identity and move through this psychosocial development stage. Then early adolescence to the end of 20s. This is, most of you are in this age group who are taking this class. You're in the stage, according to Erikson's psychosocial development, of intimacy versus isolation. It's during this stage that you're trying close relationships, intimate relationships. Maybe you're looking for a life partner. Even if you're not looking for a life partner, maybe you're dating. And so you're trying on these very intimate, close relationships. You're letting people see all of you, your flaws and your good parts. And you're getting to see other people's flaws and good parts. And you're getting a sense of what intimacy, true intimacy, looks like. And if you have difficulty in this stage, then you can end up feeling very isolated and you feel like you don't really connect with someone. Then the next stage is middle adulthood, like the 30s to the 60s. And during this, it's generativity versus stagnation. Basically, you're looking at this ability to contribute to later generations. So this is the stage that I'm in. And it's sort of this idea that you want to make sure that the world is better off for your having lived in it. It's this sense of, what am I here for? What is my life about? What kind of thing am I doing to leave the world a better place? So oftentimes people raise children during this time, and then your kids are your legacy. Maybe you have a job, maybe it's church activity, but there's something or several things that make it feel as though you've left an imprint. Sometimes people will call it legacy. And then the last stage, late adulthood to death. I'm sorry, I should go back up. The generativity versus stagnation. sometimes if you feel as though you're not contributing to later generations and your relationship with your kids isn't adult kids isn't very good, and you can end up in stagnation, or sometimes people will say, I'm just stuck. I'm stuck. And oftentimes, to get out of this stuckness, for lack of a better word, they'll have a midlife crisis. So they'll blow their whole life up, so to speak, not literally, but they'll leave their husband or wife, and they'll leave their job, they'll quit their job, and oftentimes they'll move to a whole nother state. And it's like they want to just start all over again. They're not happy with the decisions that they made. And life is, time's running out. And so, in order to make this meaningful contribution to the world, they just need to like start all over again. And we'll call that sometimes a midlife crisis to get out of this stagnation. Okay, and then the last stage is late adulthood to death. And here, if everything goes well, you have ego integrity, the sense of accomplishment, and you enjoy your adult kids now. You've raised them. Maybe you're really enjoying your grandkids and enjoying watching your kids be parents. Maybe you're enjoying your grown nieces and nephews and take pride in the fact that maybe your niece really loves singing and you were the one who played a role in having her listen to music with you all the time, and you took her to concerts and you played a role in her music development. And now that's like the way she's making a difference in the world. And so you can sit with your achievements, your accomplishments, the people that meant a lot to you and you meant a lot to them. Or if that's not what's going on, you can have real despair where you're like, that I wish I could go back and redo the whole thing. The decisions that I made were not the best ones. And I want to go back and redo it all, but of course you can't. And so that's the last stage. So these are the 8 stages of psychosocial development, according to Erickson. And this table is in your textbook on page 293. Now, it's a lot to remember. So you've got the age, the 2 things that they're going for, and what it all means. So this is one of the pieces of information that if I were you, I would make sure I have on my 3x5 index card that you can bring into the final exam, because there are some questions on the final exam about Erickson's psychosocial theory of development, and this is a lot to memorize. And so I think writing this down on your index card is a good strategy. Okay. Now let's go to Piaget's theory of cognitive development. This is the second stage theorist that I want to talk about. And Piaget was one of the first people to say that the way we understand the world, remember, cognitive development is how we're thinking, how we process information and remember things. So how we understand the world changes as a function of age. Piaget said this. So it's not that kids have like adult brains that are just smaller or just less developed. No, Piaget believes that children's brains are the way they process information is very different than the way adults process information. And he believes as time goes on an x-axis, we don't develop linearly, like where we just get a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. He thinks we jump and then we get used to that stage. Then we jump up and think about things very differently, and then get used to that stage and jump up and then get used to that stage. He thinks that we learn through assimilation and accommodation. So we're going to learn things that we did not know before. And this new information, we're then going to have to assimilate it with the information that we had before. And then we're going to accommodate this new information to create like a whole new version of how the world works. And we continually change. He puts our cognitive development into 4 unique stages. And he believes that our brains are wired to grow in this sequence. So he doesn't believe that you can do one stage and then move back and get this one, that you have to go one stage to the next. And you can't get to a higher stage till you've done the lower stage. So his first stage is called the sensory motor stage. And most kids will be here between birth and 2 years. And during this time, there's very little use of language. And so almost everything that the baby understands and knows about, the baby learns through their senses. That's why he calls it sensory motor stage. So it's this stage that they put everything in their mouths, because how things taste and smell and feel on their gums and feel in their mouths helps them to explore the world. They're going to touch things and move things. So is this toy, is it cold or is it hot or is it medium temperatured? And what does it taste like? And how does it sound? And what does it look like? And what does it smell like? They're going to use all of their senses to try to make sense of the world. And they do so by using all of their senses, by touching and feeling and smelling and tasting and listening. They're going to learn during this stage object permanence. Usually it's around 9 months old. Prior to 9 months old, if something is hidden from sight, then it doesn't exist. So if you take like a toy and you put a piece of paper over the toy, to that child, the way their brain development is before they learn object permanence, that toy doesn't exist. It's not that it's hiding under the blanket or under the sheet. It doesn't exist anymore. If you can't see it, it doesn't exist. Then around 9 months old, they'll learn object permanence. And now they know, oh, that object exists. I just can't see it right now. It's underneath that sheet or underneath that towel. It's also during this stage that, or toward the end of the stage, that they realize that they're different from other people. So when they're first born, they don't know that mom is different from them. Their own arm and something that they can touch, like their mom's stomach, that's all them. There is no sense of I'm different than other people. But as they hit the second stage, 2 to 7 years old, they definitely learn this. So this stage is called pre-operational stage. And during this stage, they're going to really learn to talk. Language becomes key. And now almost everything they learn about is through language. They stop putting everything in their mouth. And yes, sometimes they will smell things and touch things to learn about them, or taste something to learn about it, listen to it to learn about it. But mostly now they're more using sight, and they're touching it not to learn from it, but to manipulate it. And they're using language to understand what's going on. Now, during this stage, children have what we call egocentric thought. Now, what we mean by this is that the child views the world completely from his or her perspective. They cannot perspective take. They can't imagine what it would be like to be someone else and look at it from their point of view. So it's really fun if you have a 2 to 7-year-old. Now, some 7-year-olds have already moved on because they're advanced, but like it's really fun. Like take a 5-year-old, show them a picture of 3 mountains. So like draw one mountain and color it red, draw another mountain that's maybe a little bit taller, color it blue, and then another mountain, color it brown, okay, something like that. And show the child this mountain, and ask the child, what are the colors of the mountains, okay, in order. And they'll tell you in order, it's this color, then this color, then this color. Then ask them, what would the order of colors of the mountains look like if a child was on the other side of one of those mountains? So you're looking at it from this perspective. You are on the other side of these 3 mountains looking back. What would be the order of the colors then? And the kids can't do it. They will give you the exact same order as the order that they can see them. They do not know that they cannot take the perspective of someone else. Because of this, they're terrible at deceiving anyone. They think everyone knows what they know. So if they're lying to you, they think that you know that they're lying. They think that because they think if they know that what they're telling you is a lie, they think you have access to their thoughts because they're so egocentric. And so they think that you know that they're lying. So it's like a big game. So they don't even know how to deceive. They think that even when they're acting deceptive, they think you know it. So, um, okay. And also during this time, they learned the principle of conservation. So what do we mean by the principle of conservation? So let's say I pour water into a glass that's very tall and thin. And then I take the water that's in this tall and thin glass and I pour it into a short, fat glass. If I ask you, and then I pour it back in and I keep pouring it back and forth, you guys would all know, because you know the principle of conservation, that there's the same amount of water, whether it's in a tall or skinny glass or short, fat glass. It's the same amount of water. Children in the pre-operational stage do not understand the principle of conservation. So if they're focusing on height, they're going to say there's more water in the tall glass than the short glass. If they're focusing on how wide or skinny it is, they're going to say there's more water in the wide fat glass than in the tall skinny one. But they won't realize, they won't recognize that it's the same amount of water. So I have a really neat video, YouTube video that I love, that it's of a teacher interviewing kids. And you'll see it, it's after this video. It'll say conservation or Piaget's theory. And it's a YouTube video that I highly recommend that you watch. It's probably 5 minutes long, and it will really, after watching that, you won't forget this concept, the principle of conservation. The next stage is from about 7 years old to 12-year-olds. And Piaget calls this the concrete operational stage. And during this stage, the child starts to really think logically, and they no longer are stuck in the egocentric thought. They can now perspective take. They can understand how things might look differently from a different perspective. They also learn that some changes can be undone by reversing an earlier action, this idea of reversibility. We learn this a lot through these if-then things. So if I do this, then this would happen, and this would happen, and this would happen. But they can only do this more with concrete things. So you can't do it like really hypothetically, and you can't do it abstractly well at all. But they can do it with concrete things. So if I take this balloon and I take this pin, if I put this pin in this balloon, the balloon will pop. And then what will happen? That will make a loud noise. And that loud noise might wake up my baby brother who's sleeping in the next room. And when my baby brother cries, my mom's going to come in here and be really mad that I woke up my baby brother. So see how concrete that is. So it's hypothetical in the sense that it's an if-then thing, but they're trying to think logically through if I do this, what will happen? And they realize that things can be, boy, I'm not going to pop this balloon because look at all these negative things that can happen. Okay, that's that idea of reversibility. But sometimes you can undo a reversible, you can reverse an early action, not if you pop a balloon because then it's, popped and you can't re-blow it out. But I hope you understand what I mean. Okay, so that's the concrete operational stage. Now, the last stage of Piaget's theory of cognitive development is the formal operational stage. And this is from 12 years to adulthood. And this is where abstract thought becomes, what we love to do. Think of all of the things that you guys are thinking about now: truth, justice, integrity, discipline. These are all completely abstract thoughts. And you can think abstractly. You can put these thoughts together in a whole bunch of different ways, move them around, be logical and illogical with them. And so we think so differently than someone who's in the pre-operational stage. Also during formal operational stage, we're going to spend a lot of time systematically testing solutions to problems. We call it hypothetical deductive reasoning. So you wake up in the morning and your lower back hurts. You're like, I wonder what caused that. Yesterday in the gym, I spent more time than I usually do on the treadmill. Let me not use the treadmill for the next couple of days and see if my back gets better. Or maybe you say, oh, this bed that I slept in is different than the one I usually sleep in. Maybe I do better in harder beds versus softer beds. So then you sleep in a different bed. Oh yeah, it's much better. I'm the type of person where my back does better with harder beds. So we're going to do all kinds of testing, almost like you're a mini experimenter with your own behavior to try to use deductive reasoning hypothetically to understand problems and to improve the quality of your life. Okay, so those are the 4 stages of Piaget's development. And when I looked at the exam, the final exam, there are a lot of questions about Piaget's development. So make sure that when you are studying Piaget's development, that you really understand what is assimilation and accommodation, that you know when each of these 4 stages occur and what is object permanence and what are the key things that are learned in each stage. Make sure you know what conservation is and egocentrism is, and when different things happen. So, examples like a test question might be, it's not, but it could be something like, at what stage of cognitive development does hypothetical deductive reasoning occur? And you'd want to pick the correct answer of formal operational stage. Again, it's a lot to memorize, so this might be another thing that you want to put on your 3x5 index card when you're taking the final exam. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about in this video is one of the theories of moral development. And this moral development theory is by Kohlberg. So he's the last of the stage theorists that we're going to talk about. And moral development is really like psychosocial development. It's one of the pieces of psychosocial development. And Kohlberg used this. He interviewed kids a lot at all different ages. And he would ask them questions like this. In a European country, a woman is near death from a rare kind of cancer. The one drug that doctors think might save her is a medicine that a medical researcher has recently discovered. The drug is expensive to make, but the researcher is charging 10 times the cost, $5,000 for a small dose. The sick woman's husband, Henry, approaches everyone he knows in hopes of borrowing the money, but he can only get together $2,500. He tells the researcher that his wife is dying and asks him to lower the price of the drug or let him pay later. The researcher says, no, I discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it. Henry is desperate and considers stealing the drug for his wife. What would you do and why? So turn off the video for a minute. What would you do if you were Henry? Would you steal the drug or not steal the drug? And more importantly, why? Okay? Turn off the video and answer that, or just press pause and then answer that. Okay, hopefully you've written out your answer. Now, which stage of development you're in has little to do with whether you say Henry should steal the drug or not steal the drug, and everything to do with the reason why. So Kohlberg's theory of moral development, he's got 6 stages that are put into 3 phases. And so for this course, I just want you to know the 3 main things. You don't need to know the sub-stages. So in the pre-conventional stage, morality is judged in terms of rewards and punishments. So someone who would say, Henry should not steal the drug because then he'd go to prison. That's pre-conventional thinking. Or Henry should steal the drug because then his wife would live and then he'd be happy because his wife cooks him dinner and takes care of his kids for him. That's pre-conventional thinking. So morality is judged by the rewards that Henry would get or the punishments that Henry would get based on Henry's decision. Conventional morality, the second stage, has to do with pleasing others, acting as a good member of society. So stealing the drug would bring shame to my family, and so I don't steal. So that's why that wouldn't be okay. Another person might say Henry should steal the drug because if he doesn't, the wife and the rest of his family is going to feel as though he doesn't love them. That if you love someone enough, then stealing a drug is okay. So you can see in this conventional level, it's about acting as a good member of the society, whether that society is your family, your community, your church group. You want to conform to the values of that group. So you're going to do not for rewards and punishments, not so that the group will like you, but because as a good member of that group, this is what we do. Does that make sense? Now, the last one is the post-conventional. And Kohlberg believes that you're not going to get there if you're under 13, that it's going to, you're at the beginning, you're going to be in the, some people stay in the pre-conventional forever, but you're going to start in pre-conventional. And then some people will move up to conventional. And then some people, after you have to be older than 13 or so. I mean, there might be some 11-year-olds that get there, but on average, most of the time, it's going to take that abstract thinking and that hypothetical thinking that you only get in the last cognitive stage of development from Piaget. So that's why you're going to be this old before you get into this post-conventional stage. And Kohlberg believes many people never get there. But here, morality transcends the law and broader principles are applied. So here, stealing the drug is appropriate, someone might say, because it is not justified to let your wife die that over not having enough money. That there's a principle that life is more important than finances or even freedom. And so someone in this stage might say, I will steal the drug to keep my wife alone. And I realize I might go to prison. Sometimes people, for stealing, sometimes good people go to prison because there are other things that are even more important than their freedom. Or they might say it's not okay to steal the drug because we have committed to, we've made a contract with the society saying that we won't steal. And so the post-conventional, it's not about laws, it's not about rewards and punishments, it's about principles, about what the values that we hold, not based on the group that we belong to, but the principles and values that we hold, that we think must apply to everyone who lives in that society for the society to be okay. Okay, so those are Kohlberg's theory of moral, that is Kohlberg's theory of moral development. And there's quite a few questions on here too, on the exam, not tons and tons, but a few. So you would want to make sure that you could recognize if I told you a story or gave you a synapse of someone, you'd know which stage of development they were. Okay, in the next video, I'm going to start talking about physical development beginning prenatally. If you have any questions, you know to email me at maryd@cameron.edu. And I hope you enjoyed this video.